The views expressed on this Turnbuckle Tabloid live stream or Turnbuckle Tabloid podcast episode do not reflect the views, thoughts, or opinions of the Rageworks brand, including the Rageworks podcast network, Rageworks content partners, advertisers, and affiliates. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. The listener. In case you haven't heard, because I've been basically saying it for the past few weeks, we just started a new network. Yeah, New York Wrestle Media. It's a whole virtual experience visually for all those connected in the world of wrestling, pop culture, live stream video games. Oh, it's happening. And it's not only me doing it. Yeah. Got a few cohorts who jumped in the mix, covering subject matters as history, indie wrestling, news of the day, pop culture, and like I mentioned, video games. I know, me too. I'm excited. Make sure you check us out on YouTube, Twitch, and on TikTok for New York Wrestle Media. Follow, subscribe, like, be a part of the vibe of all things connected with New York Wrestle Media. Jay Bougie, and you're listening to Turnbuckle Tabloid.
This is the King of New York, Jay Bougie. Feel what I'm saying? You're listening to Turnbuckle Tabloid.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
This is the greatest Decepticon of all time, Megatron. When I'm not hunting down Autobots and humiliating Starscream, I'm sitting on my throne listening to Turnbuckle Tabloid.
Yeah, it's your boy Jay the Red Santee, your host of Turnbuckle Tabloid, here to say thank you to you, the listener, for being a part of the 7 years of wrestling, babble, and all things ridiculous here at Turnbuckle Tabloid. The podcast has been here doing it big for so many years, and we appreciate every person who's subscribed and listened to the podcast each and every year. But I got something else for you guys. Yeah, we've been doing it up different this time of year. Starting to expand our wings a little bit more. We're hitting up the YouTubes, hitting up the Twitch, hitting up the TikToks. Yeah, boy, hitting up the IGs as well. We're doing live streams there, and I want you guys to be a part of it as well. It's going to be exclusive content there. So what you don't get on the podcast, you'll get on the live streams. So it'll be great if you guys like, subscribe, began following all those social media websites for Turnbuckle Tabloid, and believe me, you will not miss a thing. Catch us there. Turnbuckle Tabloid cutting a promo. It was interesting to me that I didn't believe that I wanted to sit down and watch this docuseries, because I figured that I really had a general idea of how much of not only an influence this man was with wrestling as a whole, but also the dastardly deeds, especially with the weird mustache that he's grown recently with. But
that mustache is creepy.
Yeah, I mean, it gives just straight 70s porn vibes. Like he just was going back to his retro kind of look. But I figured the better person to have this conversation with is my friend Jim Fix, also known as Fillmore Fingers, for quite frankly the Howard Stern podcast. And you being a former wrestling fan, right? For a time being.
Yeah, it's funny. And eventually, I liked the wrestling games, like Raw versus War, like all the PSP and the PS3 and whatever, all the wrestling games you could get for different stations.
Right.
Sorry, different video games. What's that?
No, I was agreeing with you because that's what pretty much a lot of people still do to this day. They'll pick up and like at least remember those games and have a good time with that.
It was a lot more. They were a lot more fun. The thing is, and by the way, guys, this is also a simulcast for QF. I just thought if Jay was willing to do it, we could both cover it and then just use it across both platforms as bonus content on our end.
Definitely, please. I need all the viewership and listeners as possible.
No worries. And I was actually a little concerned about this documentary because I believe there was one called Vice that the Vice did based on Vince, but they were using clips from previous Dark Side of the Rings. It wasn't a brand new investigative thing like this was. And when I heard the news that they were putting this out, because I only heard about it 2 weeks, maybe less than 2 weeks before it was announced that it was coming out, and I thought, okay, this could be a fluff piece. But then when I found out that he gave away all the rights to the archives for them to sift through and have all the kind of permission to sit down and interview whoever they wanted, I thought this could be good if they are given enough time and enough episodes to do it properly. In the end, what kind of score out of 10 would you give the whole thing?
You see, for me, I'm a bit jaded with it because of, like I said, I know for the most part the history of it. The presentation of it, I thought was well done. Netflix did one hell of a job with that. It's even better than what previous production companies have done. Even WWE themselves have done. I thought they did a really good job with that. But in a whole, there was a lot that we knew about, and at the same time, Vince wasn't going to be giving up a lot.
That's one of the problems I found as well. And the other thing, but if you were a neutral, like if you didn't know all this stuff, because the problem I had with it, there are a few problems I had with it. Overall, I still would have given it I guess a 7 out of 10. Which is not good or bad. It's not bad. It's certainly decent enough, especially if you don't know anything about the WWE, if you know nothing about Vince. The problem is they don't go deeper enough into his youth, into his experience with his mother and his father and his stepfather, and they gloss over so much that he's like Charlie Chaplin. I don't know that he was ever going to give them the full insight into his upbringing, because we both deal, like now we're talking about someone that on our podcast QF, we deal with Stern, who's a massive narcissist and a little bit of a sociopath. I think Vince is no less a overt narcissist and a massive egomaniac, just like Howard.
Yeah, and that was the thing with me. I had on New York WrestleMania, we have a show entitled The Third Announcers Table, and they're two young gentlemen who they have a younger view of wrestling. It's a generation or two behind.
Yeah.
And the way that they looked at the doc was more of a introspect of how great of a businessman Vince was, or he still is to this day, and how being the kind of person that he is, and when they look back at it as, there's some light on possibility of what was his childhood was, but in the business it's called no selling, which is you never show if something's bothering you or something irritates you. It's just like if somebody pulls a rib or pulls a joke on you in the locker room, and sell it, it defeats the joke, and that's what Vince did constantly, and that's what he was as a businessman.
Well, like, I don't know about you, but when I started getting into wrestling as a kid and I was able to get into find the literature, like magazines or whatever, to find out more about the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. And I really got into it the way I got into most things that I was interested in all the way, and made it a point to be almost like Jim Cornette, be like a historian about what went on before. And it was, the fact is, this guy grew up with, let's get this right. And this is mostly based on the Playboy interview, as well as a little bit of the documentary. He was sexually abused by his mother, sexually molested, essentially, or violated.
Mhm.
And then his real father, Vince Sr., doesn't come into his life until he's 12 years old. That's not explained in the documentary.
Right.
What are the circumstances? And then his stepfather that he grew up with, he beat him. That we know he was abusive, but we don't know much more about him either. Then you put all this together and you see all the sort of the deviant stuff at the end of the whole documentary, and you realize over the years, Vince Jr. is some kind of like some type of sociopath easily.
Yeah, you gain a sense, especially when his early days when he spoke of him going to a military styled school, and he was very anti-authority even then.
Yeah.
Not realizing that the man who raised him wasn't really his father until he was like 12 years old and found out who his real father was.
Yes.
And there was no real conversation or discussion. He mentions himself about why his father wasn't around, why he left, why he wasn't around for so long. He just went to be under his father's wing and never went into full detail on whether or not if he didn't want to be a father at the time, or there was discrepancy. It was such a vague area with that, and it kind of confused me on Vince's end because it didn't seem like he really thought about even wanting to know.
Well, you'd think if he was going to do this deep dive into his life, call it what it is, he would want to give a little more than what he did. But he never. There must be something of a like I used the example of Charlie Chaplin in the 70s. Charlie Chaplin wrote a autobiography on his his entire life, and he didn't give away the tricks. He was inscrutable. It was almost like, why is the magician going to tell how he does these tricks? And Vince was no less concealed in the documentary, but there were some things from the first few episodes that I was quite fascinated with and didn't know. First of all, who the hell knew that Gorilla Monsoon was going to be given a shot at buying the WWF at the time?
Yeah, that was something that was always speculated. It was never really discussed for the fans to know, but it was interesting to learn that he was in high regards, not only with the boys but with
Vince Sr.
Vince Sr. as well, to be the one that's going to be the flag carrier for the company once Senior was gone. But Junior found a way to undercut that, made that a real business savvy move.
Yeah, and I think other people have speculated what would have happened if Gorilla had been given the reins and bought the company out. And there's just no way I can imagine it would have been anything more than a continuation of what those territories would have all done. And it just would have been, we're going to take care of the region that the WWF was, the New York area, and I guess, I don't know, Minnesota, I have no idea, wherever their territory encompassed, and then it would have maintained all the NWA, AWA, these would all what's it called, Mid-South, all of these federations mostly would have proliferated if Gorilla had taken over.
Yeah, the territories as they were very protected by the heads. Vince Senior had the Northeast, had some of Canada, and that region and such, and it was very, very mafia capo kind of and such. So much so when Vince was able to go through Georgia Championship Wrestling and take over that scene, they pretty much laid it out. They didn't hide anything to say that we want to rub them out. We wanted to take them out.
That was the story I heard, that there was actually enough scuttlebutt that they were going to pull a hit on him.
Yeah, they were. I believe Jim Ross had said that he was in the bathroom in which the heads of the territories met up, and he was to be a little gross, was taking a shit, and
did he put his feet up so no one could see?
He put up his feet, and he said that he heard that someone mentioned, said we got to take this kid out.
And they were just being cryptic, but they weren't. They didn't specify.
Yeah. So,
well, that did happen in the old days, and so other things. One of the things I remembered specifically from the first few episodes was Vince. That I didn't know this either. That Vince originally wanted Dusty Rhodes before he chose Hogan to headline the new regime change. Which to me, like when you think about, first of all, you think they could not be two more disparate, physiques, approaches to the business, talents. Now, Dusty Rhodes was fantastic on the mic, but he looked like, cookie dough. And as a flight, but the thing was, he was proven. He was good on the mic. He wasn't bad in the ring, actually, considering what he looked like. And he had a following. He was already established. And Hogan was, what if Hogan can't do it? And I can see why Vince would think that. But in the end, I mean, he did make the right choice.
Yeah, Vince Sr. Had more of a high regard with Dusty coming in. The only thing that they didn't feel would translate because of him being a Southerner, he like you said, the body wise and shape like that. But at that time, many of the wrestlers were not of that bodybuilder look. They all had that barrel shape. Bruno was a big man, but he wasn't like this just cut up individual. No. It was to Vince Jr. was the one who had this infatuation with bodybuilding and body shaping and such, that he started looking at these wrestlers this way.
Well, there's another thing that was mentioned was about Hogan's nonsense, about his bullshit about Showdown at Shea was sold out because of him and Andre. Meanwhile, that was 1980. Something like that would have been sold out because of Bruno, and you got the picture right there, Larry Zbyszko. That was a massive, massive feud. I remember there was a cage match where they just, they held nothing back. Yeah. And there was also, I think, Inoki was on that bill as well. And that might have been one of the few times Inoki came over to North America and wrestled. And he was a huge name. People in the business would have known who he was.
Yeah. And it's always one of those forgotten moments in time where, yes, Andre was slammed during that match as well.
And they were also mid-card. They weren't headliners. Yeah. This would have been the headline. The other thing was, did you ever, incidentally, it just reminded me, did you ever actually watch the Muhammad Ali Inoki fight?
Yes, I did. And it's just an exhibition, but done horribly wrong. And even the Monsoon and Muhammad fight, it's just an exhibition that just wanted to showcase. It was almost like looking at two comic book stars like meet each other for the first time, like that
from different companies, like Spider-Man meets Superman, that kind of thing.
Exactly, it was that. Yeah, it was just an event, just so people would say that they were shitty at best.
Yeah. Well, one of the other points was Tony Atlas talking about. I found this interesting, and Tony Atlas. Being also not quite as much a BSer as Hogan, but him saying that he thought that Vince didn't think much of his dad.
Yeah, I found that I don't know. I don't know whether if I would fully agree with that. I know that he looked up to him greatly, especially business wise, and being able to manage and control the locker room the way that Vince Sr. did. Even Paul Heyman did business with Paul Sr. Vince Sr. very much. And even he was a kid and he was regarded as one of the boys as he was 15 years old. There's a lot that goes on to it as well that I like we mentioned before. Like I'm not a big historian, but I read a lot of stuff, or I know a lot. I visualize a lot of stuff. I can't never give you time and dates of matches and when it occurred or such like that, but I'll know lore and the history. One book that I suggest that everybody should read is Jim Ross's new book, and he was one that I thought should have been in his docuseries, and apparently they never reached out to him.
I heard they reached out. Actually, no, they didn't. You're right. They didn't reach out, and I don't know that he was on bad terms with Vince. And even if he was, wouldn't you still want to hear what he had to say, and you maybe use that interview footage?
Well, he describes in his book that Vince in his relationship is one of the most awkward that anyone could have. There is love and respect there, but Vince always wanted to, fuck with him, wanted to rib him, wanted to, mess with him at all times.
Okay.
And when he ever had the moment, he would undercut him. But Ross mentioned at the same time, he said, I would have been in this docuseries. Hell, like he did enough coverage with the Vice Dark Side. He said he definitely would have. He was basically, if there was a chain of command, outside of Pritchard, Laurinaitis, and Kevin Dunn, he was right there in line as well.
Yes, I believe so. And obviously, forget about the interview footage we could have got. They could have used from previous shoot interviews that would have been useful, and I think they might have in the a few occasions. I remember one specifically was done for RF Video. Jesse the Body. He said that the difference between Vince Senior and Junior was that Senior was really smooth and Vince was always a bit of a hothead. Mm-hmm. And he just explained that you could walk into a room with Senior and not come out any further ahead than you were, but feel good about it. But Vince lacked subtlety, and there's never a funnier moment than when and Len wants this. He wanted it made into some kind of animation. I suggested maybe doing it when WrestleMania 3, when Vince announces Aretha Franklin. He's trying to be like Michael Buffer or something, Michael Buffer, and it's just over the top, and I guess it worked. People were fans enough to put up with that kind of stuff. However, it's clear that Vince going showbiz was always going to be in the cards for him if he got what he wanted. It's clear he had a plan, and that's lacking in a lot of federations. They could have used somebody like Vince to spice things up a bit.
Yeah, when we speak about the once he buys out his dad, he already had an agenda to take wrestling to another level. He found his flagship, and you see his flag bearer was gonna be Hogan, and he that was another an issue that occurred because he was able to poach Hogan from AWA.
Yep,
and they were none too pleased about that. But once he was able to put the right person in front of him with Sheik, make him the Americana representation for wrestling, he was off to boom. But at the same time, we grow when we watch this docuseries is that many of his wrestlers, their gimmicks and such, were a lot played off of Vince. Like Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, was what Vince wanted to be, and there was a lot going on with him. Not like he was knocking on the door to be there, to want to be the man also on screen, but he was waiting for the right time for it.
Well, yeah, and it fell into his hands. He didn't plan. I mean, that's one where you go. He sort of, I wouldn't say lucked out, but he sort of, it was serendipitous at the time. It happened in spite of his plans, and then he figured, well, may as well go for it, and it was the right move. At the same time, there's at the beginning, I keep thinking about the transition, like going from Backlund to Hogan to Iron Sheik, and obviously knowing that Backlund was just not going to cut it for his what he wanted to put together for the sake of getting bigger and doing things bigger. WrestleMania 2, for example, thinking, let's do 3 cities. Bad move. Not enough planning. He wasn't infallible, is what I'm trying to say. He did make mistakes. Who was that guy? Tom McGee? Was it Tom McGee? No. Who was the one, the infamous tape that Bret Hart was lost?
Tom McGee.
Okay.
He was going to be the next in line.
Right. So at least he knew he was thinking of who's going to be the Hogan replacement, because he can't deal with Hogan. He can't have Hogan forever because these things do need to be changed. What I found the parallel between him and Howard also was this: Stern loved to get bits from other radio stations and other DJs. Vince liked to get tried and tested wrestlers from other territories that were already fully formed. Very rarely did he have somebody up and coming and decide he was going to mold them into something. He didn't want that. He wanted people in there so he didn't have to waste any time other than building them up for the pops and getting some heat and feuds. He didn't want someone learning the ropes at WWE.
Yeah, we grew to find out that Vince had a long game, but also understood that there was an end game, and he knew that there was going to be transitions that would occur. I was just looking at it right now, where the 80s was very high with the political, the landscape, possible confrontations with war, the Reagan era and such. And Vince was keen on keeping his finger on the pulse of that. He was very aware of how to shake that up. He also knew that, the wrestlers get older, they tire out. We got to get a new person in there, a new role model for the youngsters at the time. And
yeah,
he found a hero for every villain, and that was a good look for him, especially through the Ultimate Warrior era, through the Sergeant Slaughter turning on the United States. We were able to find those things. He was very in tune with making that happen. But at the same time, after WrestleMania 3, which was the biggest thing that occurred for him, he still was struggling financially to get it really over. This is why he made partnerships with like Trump and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was interesting the fact that he kept on to Hogan longer than he should have, at least the first time around, because he didn't really have a replacement at hand. He thought the Warrior would do it, but then the Warrior was even more limited than Hogan, and ultimately was a self-destructive nightmare.
Right.
And by self-destructive, I mean he was a guy really in it for himself. I read an interview with him in 2005. I can't remember the publication, but I got the transcript for it, and he came off very loose with the Warrior. He was just saying the main reason Vince was pissed was that I went to court to get all my rights back, but to the name, my makeup, all the other things, and likeness rights and everything. And he hated that. He hated when Jesse won a lawsuit. Anybody that beat him, he was, and it was, again, there's a Howard parallel. He just couldn't stand those people afterwards. But eventually, if he knew it was good for business, he would have them back.
Yeah, another Howard parallel. This was one thing I did not know about, and I'm sharing it right now, which is, didn't know that Vince was such an avid fan of Letterman and would do Letterman often. Didn't know that.
That was true. Yeah,
side by side with Wiggy as well.
Yeah, and so Vince knew also the power of, first of all, he was big on merchandising. None of the other territories cared about that so much. Not until much later they realized they could do that. But he was really very apt for the business when he needed to be. Did he get it all right all the time? No, there were loads of wrestlers he tried to get over that were just ridiculous. And he did, like the old days, you needed someone Polish for the Polish, immigrants in the country.
Right.
For like steelworkers, you need a Russian, you need a, Middle Eastern guy or whatever to hate, or a heel, whatever, baby faces. The other problem I had with some of amongst, beyond the fact that Vince's history and his life story isn't explored well enough or deep enough, the Jimmy Snuka thing, if you wanted to talk controversy, they go into Wendy Richter, they wipe it away inside of, 90 seconds, that screw job. Then they talk about the Montreal screw job, fine. But let's go into the really seedy stuff that already Vice has covered. Maybe that's what Netflix wanted to avoid, covering old ground. But there's not enough made of that thing. Like, it's most likely, at the very least, a manslaughter charge for Jimmy.
Right. Yeah, there was
that would have ruined WWF before it had a chance to get big.
Right. And it was, and we already had on the peripheral where, the business was already being protected, as to say that, you guys are talking about that it's fake, and it's predetermined, it's scripted, and you had Schultz smacking the shit out of the ABC reporter
John Stossel, yeah.
John Stossel. You had Hogan putting Belzer out on the show, made that man a fortune, bought a house in France with that money.
I love that.
But yeah, the real seedy stuff was hiding, the bodies, and that was, a literal sense, especially with the snooker situation.
Yes.
Not many people knew at the time. You only read it through what is called dirt sheets at the time, that this was happening, that there was an incident. And yeah, Vince found a way to hide that, put that to the side, and no one even dared to resurface it until a couple of years ago, when Snooker was actually put on trial before he died about it.
Well, yeah, that was it. Like when that happened, he was huge. He was as big as Hogan ever was, at least for a place, for the territory that size. And he was gearing up to be what Hogan eventually was. And then that happened, and he had to get phased out, of course, until they brought him back. But when they brought him back, he became a jobber, essentially. I wonder how much of that was passive aggressive Vince saying, okay, we can use you, but you're not going to be the big guy. Even if you're a little older, he's probably still in great shape. Who knows what was going on underneath the muscles, but I think it was passive aggressive Vince saying, and now I'm going to get you back. You're just going to be selling for all these people up and coming, and we're just going to use you up.
Yeah. And when that era is occurring, you're also at the same time, we're progressing more. WrestleMania 4, WrestleMania 5, we're seeing the joint business ventures with Trump. You're seeing, like we mentioned, he was on Letterman, and that made a relationship with Dick Ebersol, which started off the Saturday Night's Main Event era.
You got it.
Yeah. And that's when the money started rolling, and now Vince is able to do these things where he could put certain stories away and hide them and get the big pay lawyer. There's a lawyer that he's had for over 30, 40 years, almost 40 years, that was able to, as they say, listen, just, you don't ask the butcher where it comes from. Just make sure that, you serve a good meal. And that's what the lawyer was doing. He was able to serve the good meal and not know that, hey, I'm able to put that snooker thing away. Let's work on this new steroid scandal thing. Yeah.
And then you go into the second episode, which deals with, yes, there's Dr. Zahorian and all the steroid trials and what have you. And then the problem that, the conflict of, okay, we're going to make Sergeant Slaughter anti-America, but right at that time we're invading Iraq. Not necessarily a great. I agree. It was the timing was wrong, and then it never manifested itself more obviously than when they had to change venues for that WrestleMania.
Yeah, it was sketchy for that part. They didn't really dive too much into it as well, but it was very, very serious, because they had an open venue, and they were really afraid that someone was gonna put a bullet in Sergeant Slaughter. Even in the series, in the Dark Side of the Ring series, discussed that he was getting death threats. He was getting bombing threats at his house.
Amazing. And not surprising, actually, back in those days. Yeah. So then if you go through, there's the infamous Hulk Hogan on Arsenio clip that I saw in real time, and remember thinking, even at that time, you got to be BSing, dude. There's just no way you're not doing steroids along with the rest of them. And the most obvious representation of that wasn't even him. He didn't have the best physique. I would say Morocco. The way Morocco morphed from being a kind of, he's got muscles, but they're hidden under a bit of pudge in the early 80s. But by the time by 88, 87, he is ripped. He looks like he's cut out of marble. And I don't believe you just suddenly develop this massive physique in that era without some pharmaceuticals. And obviously that came out.
Yeah. And some of them were even doing it as a rehab. Many times, and this is whenever you're taking steroids, it's rehabilitation. Remember, these guys were on the road 300 days a year, and those bodies, regardless of what you say, like what you say about wrestling, they're gonna take some pounding, and a lot of them would strike through it. Yeah.
I just recently got the Ken Patera book. I didn't know he released one, and I read it. I don't know if you've got a chance to go through it. And he mentions at one point looking over at the Bulldogs, dealing with getting their injections, right? And he said, you know what, you guys are probably putting the amount of steroids I put in my body in the entire year in this one night in your bodies. Because he said I did them, but it was, I knew how to cycle them because I was, a pro, like an amateur weightlifter going into the Olympics. And he goes, I don't know why these guys felt the need to do this, but they didn't all have the same kind of training and everybody wanted a shortcut. But you're right. It was also for rehabilitative purposes in case they were trying to fight through stuff. But the damage on your kidneys and your liver, and your heart, holy shit.
Well, one guy that we're seeing right now, Warrior, when he came in, even as a kid, when I looked at him and I was like, because I remember him in I believe it was AWA Mid-South. He was known as a Dingo Warrior. And even
that's
then,
right.
This guy is huge. And you knew then and there that there's something. The running joke was always that, get yourself in shape, brother, and get yourself the Hulk Hogan steroid kit. Like instead of the little weights and stuff, it's like, nah, man, the vitamins and steroids, guy. We know that.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the Arsenio thing, he sold himself out in a way, but he didn't do any justice by protecting Vince or the company at all with it. Like, there was nothing there really for that.
And I don't remember if the documentary makes mention of it, but even though like it's all clear as night and day when you say, okay, he didn't tell us to take steroids, but it was obvious. They said, look who's getting pushed and who isn't.
Right.
Look who's going for the getting the top of the tier, top of the pyramid treatment. Well, Warrior, Hogan, at the time, I can't remember who else. It would have been like not even Kerry Von Erich because he had so many drug problems. It might have been him if he had, like, as they say, Texas Tornado, that fucking awful name. We didn't know who he was, right? And it's obvious there that you could it's like it's unsaid. You don't have to say, you don't have to put it into words. It's not going over the phone lines. You just figure this guy's making all kinds of money and we're not, and we're smaller guys. Do the math.
There was also a part that what shook not only the steroid stuff, but Jesse Ventura wanted to sit and wanted to unionize all this.
Yes.
And Hogan, being the fucking stooge that he is, he immediately ran and told Vince about this. And he makes no bones about it. He's like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, it was me.
I'm trying to think of a wrestler who has come on. I mean, okay, Chris Benoit, maybe he takes the cake, for murder-suicide. But for someone being such the biggest liar on the planet, that's where the Howard parallel comes in, but not with Vince. With Hogan will say anything at any time to anybody for attention, to make it sound like he knows what's going on. And the very idea that he would try to undercut the guys because clearly he was making the most money and he did not want anybody else getting ahead.
Yeah, he made no bones about it, but then he'll also backtrack this day and age and be like, well, I didn't have control of my creative. Bullshit. Everybody knows you had that. Everybody knows you had your control of creative, even through the WCW days. So we can't sit there and say that, yeah, Vince knew at a certain point in time that it was time to, as they say in the business, pass the torch.
Right.
But Hogan wasn't ready to do that. Look at the finish we had at WrestleMania 6 with Warrior. He kicked out right after the 3. Like he wasn't ready to let it go.
Well, I was going to ask, do you think the way it goes, we're playing with time a little, I suppose. Do you think the WWF gets as big as it does without Hogan and vice versa? Do you think that it's a perfect match, or do you think Hogan, no matter what, would have been a huge star somewhere else and then eventually been there anyway?
No, it was lightning strike and getting the electricity at the same moment during fucking Back to the Future, and we got Marty able to fucking go into the DeLorean at the exact moment at 88 miles per hour to get him going, because no Hogan, no Vince thoughts, no connection with the Cyndi Lauper MTV rock and wrestling look, that never happened. There was no way it would have happened.
Yeah, well, the connection to Rocky 3 and Hogan being sort
Right.
of, made super mainstream because of that. Vince knew the value of having him on board just because of that kind of thing.
Right. But they thought that, around this time frame, Hogan is, dealing with injuries, Warrior's coming in, Warrior's not Hogan. He's not, being the buddy to Vince. Warrior wants his money, he wants his thing, his contracts, he wants everything, his merch, licensing and everything. Transitioning over through that, they had to make waves because, this is occurring. Then Hogan's going to be out the door. He's leaving soon. The next step, like you mentioned, it was the body era, but none of these guys can do it now because the steroid case basically was going to hinder that.
Well, then you go into the popularity of the WWF kind of declining, right? You've got a sex scandal. You've got the what was the fella? He was on Donahue. The three guys on the panel with Vince, which was a disastrous move on Vince's part.
With
Tom Powers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you look at that footage, the raw footage is there on YouTube. They got it from the same place, I'm certain. Mm-hmm. Vince comes off so poorly, and his lies are right there and there. He's just a bad liar in that situation. And I don't believe that Tom Powers, he should have been like a lawyer or something. He looks him straight in the eye and he flat out says, this is what happened. I don't doubt the Pat Patterson thing. I know you said it's been debunked, or you believe that it has been debunked, but I don't. There's so many guys that talked about it and having experiences with Pat. There's no way I can doubt it.
It's when Tony Atlas comes up and he mentions it during the doc that Pat Patterson would grab his cock in the locker room and such, and they ask, why didn't you complain? He goes, who am I going to complain to? Pat was right there. He's the second in charge. Like, he's the man in Vince's ear.
Remember Psycho Sid said, no, Pat, I don't want to watch the stars with you. and then the Roddy Piper one, which I brought up. And if you look at that video, if you look at Piper in that video, there's not a doubt in my mind. This is a guy reliving molestation back in the day, because that's one, it was held over his head. I don't doubt it in the slightest. You can tell he's so bothered by it.
I think what the telling thing was, when they all was released and they all had to spend their time, but Pat was brought back, and their question is like, well, if you didn't believe Pat did it, then why did you let him go? And he says, because he had to go out with the garbage. We were going to recycle him back, but he had to go out with the garbage. He was tied to it. And believe me, I know that Vince would still probably paying him under the guise as though like he wasn't there, but he was still taking care of him.
I'd say he could have even been booking from afar. Right, I mean, there's no reason to think that he didn't have him on speed dial anytime he wanted. Right, but then the idea. So bottom line is, there's another example, one of the biggest examples of the scumbaggery of the organization, that Vince would have a guy like that on staff and not care about it.
Yeah, that was like very telling of what Vince really had to stress when it came to his greed or his ambition or his narcissism, where it didn't matter to him that people were getting affected, people were being assaulted and such. It didn't matter to, and we like we mentioned earlier with the other sexual allegations, especially with the referee and such. He didn't care about who was getting affected, just to make sure that WWF and that company was going to be recognized by the world.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to think of how it leads into Hogan going to WCW, and at the time prior to the Attitude Era, that there's the talent is sort of. He's having trouble finding replacements for just about everybody at the WWF. In other words, if you have to replace the JYD, if you got to replace, Tito Santana, if you got to reinvent some of these big timers. Andre's retiring. He's done. He's dead, actually. I mean, before long. You've got all these people. What are you going to do? You get the smaller guys to try to carry the torch while the steroid trial is underway, and it gets. He was looking at serious time, Vince. That doesn't get stressed enough. He was actually quite nervous about getting put away.
Yeah, even though he says he never knew about it, but the doctor was on your payroll.
Yeah,
the doctor was going to these guys with bushels of pills and as much and hypodermic needles as any radioactive beach you can think of. He ensured that that these guys were going to stay on the roids and such, but it's all like that. It's like the Vince was like, he ignored the fact. He was like, I didn't want to know that if this was happening. I didn't want to know that this was occurring.
Do you know? Maybe I'm an idiot, but I never heard of the curtain call before this documentary. I did not know that happened.
Oh yeah. That was a huge
talking point.
Yeah, it was a huge day for wrestling, a night for wrestling, because that basically was telling the fans, hey, this is all bullshit. It's all nonsense. Even though it was done during a dark event, a dark show is a non-televised show. This is done in Garden. Nash and Hall were leaving the WCW. Shawn Michaels and Triple H show their appreciation for the guys and hug them, even though they were supposed to be rivals during this time. Yeah. And they show the big hug. The big discrepancy that goes about it, that the boys in the back were not happy about it. But Vince, being a guy who's always said that he's still part of the boys, he signed off on it. But once he got backlash from the guys in the back, from the boys in the back, somebody had to get punished. And the person that got punished was Triple H.
That's right. So he suspends him, I'm sure just took away time and probably took away pay and whatever, and just, it's like a detention for him.
No, he actually did worse. What he did to him was, he took away his push. For people who don't know, his push meaning that he was going to excel on the ladder and become one of the faces of the company. And he took away that moment for him because of what occurred. And he was supposed to win their King of the Ring and become their flag bearer of the company. He was going to go headstrong against, the Bret Harts and such. But who ended up winning was the man who took over the 90s, which was Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yes. And that was a stroke of genius. But again, with the Stone Cold, again, it's funny. That's an example of something getting viral, something becoming big with having nothing to do with Vince, in my opinion. It was sort of, he rolled along with it because he saw what it was going to do. And if you needed a new form of merchandising to get rid of all those, because you can't sell any more Hulkamania, foam fingers, and you can't sell any more t-shirts, you need someone else. And that Austin 316, I saw that on people that had no interest in wrestling, people wearing that.
Yeah, Brett and Sean tried to hold it together with the New Generation era. Yeah, but that era was also the most cheesiest of them all. We had the doinkies and the the dumpsters. We had the goons. It was just gimmick after gimmick that was just silly. And the only two guys that was really out there holding it together was Sean and Brett. I mean, let's not to take anything away from Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, Diesel, Kevin Nash, but those guys had left and they needed a change. And it's again lightning in a bottle. Stone Cold, after that that declaration with being honored at the King of the Ring. And if you're a wrestling fan, and if not, if you ever get the chance to look back on it, it's important on what he says during that promo to Jake the Snake Roberts. Jake saying he's a born again. He put the demons aside, and Stone Cold Steve Austin is telling this guy who's been a legend with WWF for years, get out of my ring. Yeah. your trials and tribulations doesn't mean crap to me, and when he hits the Stone Cold 316 line, it just explodes, and the next night on Raw becomes like rabid Austin fans.
Yeah, and it's something, not everything is planned. Like people call him a genius, but he can't plan everything, and he certainly didn't plan that. The other thing, of course, thinking of specifically, obviously, he didn't plan to lose that much talent to WCW, but clearly he was having enough money problems to where. I find it hard to believe that even in that era, he didn't already have loads of money stashed away from years of very successful gates. Although if you look at the numbers of the WrestleManias, they definitely lowered, like the attendance numbers started trending lower and lower each successive year for a while there. But what I like, for example, think of when The Rock made his debut, and I think they addressed it, like the fact that the Honky Tonk Man was a babyface first before he came heel. This is the one business where you can get away with that. You go with this persona. You can't in the music industry start singing heavy metal and all of a sudden go pop and have people accept that. But here it was genius that they were able to turn around an idea that they thought was going to work and make it work in the opposite direction. If Vince knew that a heel Honky Tonk Man or a heel, not a heel, but like a sort of attitude, badass Rocky Johnson, Rocky Maivia would capture the zeitgeist, then he would have started with that, not flipped it.
Yeah, that, and you mentioned about the money. As you see here, Brett was their guy. And Brett, who came from a tag team in the 80s, was able to branch out as a singles and became a superstar in his own right. Wanted to stay loyal to Vince, wanted to be there. How Vince offered him a 20-year contract. He was going to stay there for the rest of life, but realized that he couldn't be, like you mentioned, money was going down. They would have smaller venues. They went from doing Toronto and Detroit's big arenas, and now you're doing the smallest venues in Chicago to do your WrestleManias. Yeah, and the writing was on the wall. WCW was on the rise, and they were taking their stars. Savage left, Hogan was there, and now they were the one that was poaching. I thought it was telling. I didn't know as well, was that Shane had explained that Vince went to Brett and showed him the loopholes in the contract and said, listen, I'm not going to be able to pay you. I know I promised you this, and this is what we had contractually, says, but I don't see how I'm going to be able to do this. So this is your way out. These are the loopholes in the contract, so you can get out and you can see what money they can offer you in WCW.
Well, now, and I presume that's because he really couldn't afford to pay him. Right. And it's smart on him for having that, because I was trying to think of what do you do if he leaves you? Do you still have to pay him out the remainder of his contract? So these loopholes are just absolutely one of these fail safes, which he's got to be smart to do that. But so eventually that takes us into the Attitude Era. Of course, we've got, but then the Owen Hart thing, they discussed that a little bit. Again, it's something that's covered better on Vice than in this particular documentary, but there was so much to do. I remember telling you at the beginning, they couldn't do the entire thing justice in 6 episodes. If they were 6 2-hour episodes, maybe.
Right.
So then we're going further into I think it was episode 5 for the family business. I found that, and our buddy Len also found that probably the most interesting piece, because it was getting closer to what more of real Vince that we know of, not just because he decides to become quote unquote Mr. McMahon, but by this point he's already admitted his infidelities to Linda McMahon. And he's been a bit of a dog. The Diva era starts in, all of a sudden it's more TNA again. And at that time it was totally acceptable.
Yeah. It always, especially after once the Mr. McMahon character became such a huge thing during the Attitude Era, I always thought that it would just go away it'll just be one of those moments in time in which we enjoyed the rivalry. He and Stone Cold. The corporation grew. Then we had the shitty reveal of him being the higher power and all this stuff. And then after a while, I just thought it would go away. But going into that next era of Stone Cold leaving, Rock is going to Hollywood. There was a moment where you would think that, hey, Vince could go away and Shane and Stephanie could now become more involved in it, and which they did. They tried, especially when we saw the purchase of WCW. Shane, who was the name that was on the contract, as they said.
Yeah.
But there was always something that people had already known about Vince, that it was just, there's still that underlying creep factor going on. There was always something going on. And he found the right time to push that creep factor to higher levels.
Big time.
And he had a circle of individuals who around him who shared his thoughts. You mentioned with the Divas, John Laurinaitis was the guy who was basically the pipeline for all that stuff.
Yes.
A lot of the females that he brought in, it was also very compelling, the story about Sable. Sable was a weird story. I wanted to get your thoughts about her leaving the company and then coming back after the lawsuit and such.
Because why? Like, you're wondering why? She sues Vince McMahon, and then all of a sudden is allowed back when that's not really that doesn't really work. You don't invite your ex-wife to your house anymore after you've divorced. But I suppose people have market value. They have marquee value. They have some value. Selling things. And if he was lacking in some aspect, like a Divas thing, then I could see him saying, look, it's just business. I still hate her guts. She sued me, whatever, but she puts asses in seats, and I need more bims. I need more tits. I need more ass. And she qualifies. Are you suggesting maybe there was more like behind the scenes, like blowjobs involved or something to get it back?
Because it was and then it was more like a salacious angle that occurred, and you double down with the whole reasoning and why she left, and then the allegations, the lawsuits and such. But then you bring it back. It goes back to what we talked about how Vince, in his own ways, likes to rib and bury individuals on screen. It's his ego. It's his narcissism that does that as well, because
it's a power move.
It's a power move. You came back to me. Now I'm gonna display a way to humiliate you and such.
Yeah, he was absolutely outed in the whole series as a control freak. There's no question. But again, there's certain things, certain factors that are completely out of his control. The Benoit murders, the fact that the next day after the murder-suicide, he the day they find out he's dead, but they don't find the full information. He just went straight ahead and went into it rather than wait a little while to find out what happened. Right. And it was a horrible, horrible look. I remember at the time thinking, you could not have got this one more wrong, dude. This really looks bad. And at that point, also Eddie Guerrero I think it was Eddie Guerrero had already passed away.
He had already passed, yeah.
Yeah, and Brian Pillman not long later on, I believe.
No, Brian was early on. He was in the 90s. Actually, the anniversary celebrated, but it was just his anniversary of his death this past week. And another instance in which was another controversial issue was the night they found Pillman was at a pay-per-view as well, died in a hotel. The next night on Monday Night Raw, he puts the wife on TV to discuss Brian.
Yes.
Right. What are we doing here, Vince?
It's insane. And I mean, also, I was thinking across federations, the Gino Hernandez story that was well told on Vice, again, really, really seedy, just world class. I mean, the Von Erich tragedy and all this stuff. These are all things making the news, but pre-internet, not really newsworthy enough where people are going to get a deep dive into the thing, like where guys like Phil Mushnick are going to put in poison pen letters and stuff,
Right.
and people getting people more involved, like the Stossels, the 20, like the Geraldos, anybody like that. So at this point, Vince is going into trying to juggle a bunch of things. He wanted to put the we glossed over the what was it, the World Bodybuilding Federation or something?
WBF,
WBF, which I don't even remember as a kid. That's how short the window was before he decided this doesn't work.
Yeah,
but
it was only like a marketing stuff that they did in the magazines and small vignettes on the shows, and no one gave a shit about that.
So the money he pumped into the XFL, again, and to me, a really incredibly stupid decision on his part, but that again, I think is more about his hubris, and therein he differs from Howard. He put his own money on his own product and he lost. Like he gambled on himself and he lost. However, Howard would never have done that with anything. He's never going to make his own marbles go astray if he can help it. He always wants someone else to put it in. Then if the logo change, which, my God, I can only imagine all this gear, all this swag you have to throw away because you got to change to WWE.
You lost to the World Wildlife Federation. Like
exactly.
You lost to a panda bear. That's what you did. You lost. But going back to what you said about Wiggy, you mean to tell me Wiggy didn't invest in Howard Stern Productions? That wasn't him?
Yeah, Howard Stern, son of the beach.
We didn't see was it 3 o'clock high? We didn't get to see that. We didn't get to see the Porkies. They didn't see any of that.
The only thing I think with Stern, it was always just pay-per-views. Like once he did some of those things, he put out on his own dime, but then he made shitloads of money because of the whole, that was his closed circuit television event. But either way, they've got now the other thing that thing I knew would happen once someone was going to lose the war between WCW and WWE, and now there's no competition at this point in time in the history of wrestling. He was going to suffer as a result of amalgamating those companies, because even though you have all that talent, you only have so much airtime. So who's going to occupy that airtime? If you don't do what they did with the mistake they made with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and put it on 5 days a week and then oversaturate your product, you're going to be in a tight spot.
Yeah. And he was still it seemed as though he still had this mentality that he was fighting a company that wasn't there anymore. By this time, WCW was already gone. He done bought it. There was nobody else around for him. So he needed something to do. And what he needed to do was start a football league, which he saw was an abomination. We saw that you had one good night, and after that, no one gave a shit. But once again, that was another meeting that, an enterprise that occurred with his relationship with Dick Ebersol with NBC. They helped put that together. But we saw that nobody cared about the mix of real sports and wrestling. It didn't coincide with the fans.
No, and so this is at the between I'm going to say 99 going into 2000, 2002 all the way up, early 2000s. There's a synergy with Stern. That's why Stern starts having all these wrestlers in Goldust, Bret Hart, Roddy Piper, whoever else, and the Piper interview is actually one of the best ones he did. And he's putting Bret Hart on Mad TV. There's all these people sort of he's trying to scratch and claw and get WWE more mainstream again than he when the lull happened. But then The Rock's gone, Austin's gone because he's injured mostly, and he's maybe getting some film work initially.
He had actually at WrestleMania he had retired and it was done. He just walked out. He was over. It was done with.
I don't blame him, actually. So then the Ruthless Aggression era starts up, and John Cena, and then you've got the conflict with him and Shane McMahon. And do you believe that story that that was it Shane that said, he held a knife up and said, "You got to put this into my heart if you want to take over." Because I perfectly, to me, I had no problem believing that.
First of all, Heyman is like the perfect essence of wrestling. Heyman gives the most poetic view of wrestling. He and could sell.
Great speaker.
Awesome. Can exaggerate a little bit. He can exaggerate slightly. But I do believe that there was a timetable in which, there was a back and forth with Shane and Vince, and possibly something like that could have occurred. Was it that dramatic? I don't know, maybe, but it sounds great. It sounds very Shakespearean. It sounds like something that you could hear from the old scriptures and such.
Well, the thing is at what point do you believe the Vince should have bowed out of production completely?
I believe he started really losing the touch of the fan base and of the culture around that time, maybe around the mid 2000s, around that era. Like, I believe that especially with Shane coming to him and saying, "Hey, there's an opportunity here for us to invest in this other thing." You know, the WF sucked. XFL didn't do well at all. This UFC thing, it has a following, and Vince disregarded him. Now, I believe that if it came from somebody else, he probably would have taken a chance with it. But it came from Shane, and this is why he didn't follow up with him.
Well, the parallel here is what's really interesting as well. So you got Vince Sr. He was not a warm guy to Vince Jr. Right. He just withheld love, affection. So, this is how you build a psychopath, like Vince McMahon, and a deviant, a sexual deviant, and clearly just a completely amoral piece of shit. Now, Shane comes off really well in the documentary. I don't know that, and I'm actually kind of amazed how well he comes off, because you'd expect him to be, a chip off the old block. But this egotism and it was so, he looks like an oversized Bolshoi ballerina here in that picture. Look at Vince doing his jeté. But at some point, the XFL and the WBF or whatever, these are, like, I don't know what Vince thought. He could spread out I think it was just ego that he thought, I can make this happen, which, again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't believe he could have done the XFL and WWE successfully at the same time, even if it had been a hit. Something was going to have to suffer.
Yeah. I remember there was talks that he would take a breather from WWE at the time to work more with the XFL if it was going to be a success. Mm-hmm. Kind of wish that did happen, because it's in the 2000s. Those some big stars came out of there, like Edge, Cena, Batista, Eddie, Benoit. Those guys were booming at the time. It still was, Vince didn't have his finger on the pulse of what was happening with the climate those day and age. He was still running the business as his own private joke to himself. It was his own inside comedy store. He had things where wrestlers constantly farted, and he found that hilarious. That was his thing. Yeah. He just was running a production, a promotion that was just for his liking.
Interesting you say that, because, again, there's another parallel between him and Stern. Around the same time, Howard's losing listeners. He's going to eventually go into Sirius and satellite, and then lose in almost 99%, 95% of his listenership, maybe more, actually, relatively. And then you've got this whole situation where, first of all, I was amazed. I was glad they put that Christopher Nowinski, the neuroscientist guy, who went and explained the CTE problems with, Chris they examined his brain. It was fascinating. I think the Fifth Estate did it on YouTube. They did a whole documentary about it. There's no question, it's scientifically proven this is happening. But football was trying to fight it, and the idea that Stone Cold Steve Austin says in front of the camera, "I don't know about this. I'm not really sure. I don't know that. I don't want to be called a naysayer, but I just don't believe it." I'm like, dude, I'd understand you didn't go to Harvard, but this is empirical evidence. It's just there. It's proven. Science isn't wrong in this situation.
Yeah, I was shocked that Stone Cold actually tried to say that,
Defend.
that he didn't believe that there was such thing as CTE, especially the fact that with the injuries that he had taken, hell, Owen spiked him on his head, almost paralyzed him. He didn't, he even mentioned that he didn't feel the same after a while.
Yeah.
Also, I found it very odd that Vince couldn't believe that Undertaker during his match with Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania didn't suffer a concussion. He just really believed that Undertaker just couldn't take the fact that he was losing the streak. That's very, very interesting.
It's telling.
Of what he believed. Well, a man who's, we spoke about Hogan.
Not wanting to job people once he got to the top. Yeah.
But at the same time, you got Undertaker, who became the most loyal performer for WWE's history. Was another one that was looked as a son to Vince as opposed to his own child.
Yeah, really.
But just couldn't believe that Taker had a concussion. No, he left WrestleMania with him to go to the hospital, but yet couldn't believe that he had a concussion.
So why say it on camera to these people that are making a documentary about you when it makes you sound like a sociopath or some type of complete dickhead? And you're going to the hospital. The guy's going to doctors are going to tell you he suffered a concussion, dude.
Right.
Like, you're flying in the face of medical science here. And then ultimately some of the storylines, like they were at one point, I couldn't believe it. I did not believe it that he was going to make a storyline where he impregnated Stephanie, his daughter.
This is a guy who was wrestling God. He wrestled God. Like,
yes.
That's what he wanted to do.
You mean George Burns? So,
I've heard that story before, and Stephanie, thankfully and great and smart, was like, yeah, we're not doing that. No. But the other story that was funny as well was the fact that she legitimately was going to marry Paul Levesque, Triple H.
Yeah.
It was going to be a shoot. It was going to be the legit wedding. And a week before the wedding, he has a match with her. He has a match with her a week before her wedding, her legit wedding. And Linda the whole time was like, do not damage her face. Do not hurt her. So it's almost like I said, once again, very passive aggressive, very humiliating for him.
Right. And that's exactly, again, it's something akin to what Stern would do when people try to get ahead. He wants them to somehow suffer as a result of this. Now, Shane returns to the WWE in 2016, I believe. And the violence started to go. After the Chris Benoit thing, they decided, okay, we can't do chair shots, head shots, and we can't do certain stunts, let's say, that are going to endanger the product, because they sign with Peacock later on, and then ultimately you got, like, there's that era where it started getting more PG, I guess, like family friendly.
It's just called PG era. That's what it's called.
Yeah, and so, but the thing was, when I, really when I grew up, it wasn't, certain things weren't PG, but also it was a different era. We could watch that. We could watch Randy Savage get a real cobra on his arm and not be bothered by it.
Right.
Although the screenshot is funny. Have you ever seen that screenshot of the kid in the crowd? Like, when there's a still of him in the ropes, right? And the kid looks like he's just lost his intestines shitting, from that thing. And so the idea that they had to go back to being more family friendly, to me would never have bothered me in the slightest, because I always just loved the athleticism. I always loved watching the soap opera kind of stuff, the betrayals, the heel turns and stuff. I didn't need to be the sex stuff. He decided that's what's going to sell. They had to tone that down as well. Divas had to get, God, it was like the Middle Ages, the way Tony Atlas explained it. We treated the women like shit. We were monsters.
The early 2000s, you had a segment that was called The Lesbians.
Yes.
But once again, you had in the Attitude Era, people wanted it back. They wanted some kind of adult kind of themes with wrestling.
Yeah.
But people tend to forget, and I always tell people, because I lived through it. I watched it all. I was in my late teens, early 20s when this was occurring. The Attitude Era wasn't really a good era for wrestling. It was good for marketing and selling.
Yeah, it was as a brand, it was good, but and it sold clearly, and that's what he was looking for, swag. Right. But that era really bothered me because it was the era of super long promos in the ring. Right. People just, and to me, that's killing time. I wanted to actually watch matches going on. I don't mind at them trying to kill time within a match to make it go longer. They want to pull a Broadway, whatever the hell it is. But the idea that you're going to, just, like I said, pad things out. To me, it showed a lack of creativity anyway. So they go, we're getting close to the end. And again, the last episode is the one where Vince has almost no involvement in, because at this point he stepped down in 2022 initially from the sexual misconduct allegations and the trafficking. But then he returns in January 2023. I'm sure it's because he has, he's able to do that. He still has retained a majority share. And then finally, Stephanie resigns. Now, I wanted to ask your opinion on that. Do you think it was because she didn't want the brand, the McMahon name, to poison the company going forward? That included herself?
I believe that Endeavor and TKO was the one that did that. She understood when she and Nick Khan, who came from a sports agent, who was also a very close friend of Dwayne Johnson's The Rock, right, they brought her in and such. They were the co-chairs of the company, and things were lining up the way it should with the company. We finally we were getting away from the Vince shtick that was happening. Right. Now we are in an era where they have competition. All Elite Wrestling is now here. AEW is a legit competitor to the brand. They're losing stars. Jericho leaves. Dean Ambrose, Moxley leaves. Finally, Edge goes over there as well. Christian Cage, they're gone from WWE, and Vince never really acknowledged it that there is a legit competitor there. Once he steps down, the team of Khan and Stephanie start branching out creatively. Paul Levesque takes over as the creative side of it. I didn't know for a long time that Stephanie McMahon, years prior, was lead creative as well. Now the roster is a little bit more comfortable with that. But once the allegations come up and it ramps up, you only had one or two stories, the payoff, 6 million here, 9 million there. But once the real story, once the Grant story comes up and it ramps up, and they really had to say, listen, you got to go away. Vince had to go.
Oh, yeah, because that's business. That's going to affect the bottom line. Right. And if he's no longer the head honcho, he can't really do anything about it.
Yeah. It was also compelling to know that Shane took a lot of the business part personal, especially when it involved his mom. He wasn't very pleased with Paul and Stephanie's relationship, but he grew to, they became close. Yeah. But that I believe that was a key aspect to why Vince never really wanted Shane to take the helm. Stephanie was bred and seemed to model her father, but she had different views. She supported the women's movement. She wanted to see women move away from being just tits and ass to become more competitive. Yeah. And didn't look at it that way. He thought they were novelties. They were the Mildred Burks or fucking Moolah.
Moolah was wrestling.
Show they bras and panties.
Yeah, well, we're when Mula's still wrestling. I mean, God, you could, you're like, God, you're 30 years away from Botox. Just wait, you'll look good again. She was Mamie Van Doren in the ring. Now, I
Right.
think the thing, you're right, and so he was stuck on, and he just could not get past the fact that he was yesterday's news, and these mergers that happen, they remove your importance in a way when you have to sort of be the second banana to whatever CEO, like in terms of, TKO and UFC and this whole, you're selling to Endeavor, you're making a channel with, was it Netflix? They were going to have
Paul's going to be on Netflix starting in January. Yeah.
Right. So, and then you're right. And Stephanie had the right idea of being able to getting women wrestlers to also, let's be honest, pad out your roster a little bit and add a little more something that people might enjoy. And in this day and age, absolutely, there are people that would, especially the female fans that would enjoy watching wrestling, believe it or not. I think there is a market for that.
It's a huge draw for it because, especially with kids, whenever I'm at independent shows, kids, especially young males, young female, especially young males, they lose their shit.
No kidding.
They love to see women's wrestling, and there's always been that line of, are they more sexy or are they more athletic? And now I believe they found that balance.
Yes,
creatively. I think that now with a McMahon not being in charge, it kind of shows what the diversity of the creativity that's happening, what's going on. I believe Shane and Stephanie would have opened up the floor to certain ideas that weren't a Vince kind of run, but at the same time, TKO had to sit back and go, at the end of the day, they're still a McMahon. We can't. This is why I say right now, if you guys are into wrestling, their hot baby face right now is Cody Rhodes, the son of the plumber, and Dusty Rhodes' son, and he's white, blonde hair, wears red, white, and blue. He's kissing babies, shaking hands with everybody, and this is their renaissance. It's their Hogan again. It's their Hulk Hogan.
Yes.
He's their barrier to get that McMahon stink away from them.
Yeah, and there was speculation at the end of the documentary that would you be surprised if McMahon came back? He's not coming back. They're not bringing him back because you saw they showed one of the text messages from Vince to Janelle Grant, the woman who she was involved in the civil suit, I believe. I think that's correct, right?
Right. And then there's also a federal investigation with everything else that's going on with the trafficking and such.
If you read the text message, and yes, it's a personal text message, it's so gross and so like when you think of an older man, you should be more dignified. This is if you could throw the text message in a mud wrestling ring, that's not as dirty as this. That's the point. Like, it may as well be a scat or like some kind of and there eventually involves scat, according to the news reports I got. And it was so vile and misogynistic. And I go, you cannot have a guy like this working for you because the brand will just crumble into powder, and he can ruin future partnerships, advertising. It's brutal. And so he sold his 400 million, something like that, to stock, TKO stock. Yeah. And they canceled his final interview, which would have been, I think, if he was really brave at all, I'm sure his lawyers told him, just don't do it. Like, this is where you can pull the plug. But I think if he wanted to, and if he had his druthers, he would have done it. But the lawyers just didn't want him maybe implicating himself again in a future civil trial.
Please, he basically did during the moment when they're asking him, what are you thinking about right now? And he's talking about he has 3 thought processes that's going on in his head.
Right.
And what's the third one doing? He's like, it's doing something fun, and it has to do with sex. And it's like, Vince, come on, dude. Like, what are you doing?
Gross. It's gross. So again, like him, like Howard, there's another parallel. These old guys talking about sex. It's just creepy.
Right. He did make an attempt to return the night after WrestleMania.
Yes.
Locker room was already comfortable with what's going on. There was a breath of fresh air. There's a lot more communication with creative. Let's work around certain things that's being out there, and it's an ebb and flow that's been working well. Yep. He comes back the night after Mania, Monday Night Raw. He takes the lead at the gorilla position, named after Gorilla Monsoon, and he's directing. The fans immediately knew that Vince was in the building. They immediately knew, because the whole show went back to that format.
Yes.
And everybody was, from the commentators to the referees and such, everybody went back. And it's like their butthole got tight again. And it's like, oh God, we're under this again. And finally, TKO, the head Ari, just said, you know what, Vince, we need you to do other things for UFC. Why don't you just go over there for a little bit? And then that's when, ironically, around that time, the Janelle Grant real allegations came out, and that's when he was like, "Listen, you got to go. We just can't. We can't be doing this anymore."
Right. It was more graphic than the Weinstein thing, but not nearly as not nearly as bad as what's happening to Diddy right now. Right. And you can't. There's no whitewashing of this. There's no spin capable of taking this back.
The one thing that they didn't touch on, and I was very put off by the fact that they didn't talk about, was his relationship with one of the other individuals that's accused on the text messages, which is Brock Lesnar. Mm-hmm. He has a very close personal tie relationship with Brock, who, by the way, is married to Sable. Once again, returns. How does this occur? How do you have this relationship? But yet, Brock never seems to do wrong on the Vince's eye. And I would have loved to have gotten more detail on why these two had this relationship so tight, so close, that he was able to share these text messages and the possibilities of having some kind of tryst with this woman. Like, I wanted to know, what was that all about?
Well, it certainly would open up. It would not open up, but it would shed more light on some of these angles that we can only speculate on. And as I said earlier when we started this, the McMahon childhood was definitely something they really needed to get more into. But when you get to near the end, you got this picture of Bruce Pritchard, who looks like a fitness guru in that chair. Now, Bruce mentions that like they're all talking. There's an incongruity where he goes, he paid for my wife's cancer treatments and da 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 da. But it's transactional. Like, this is a person that Vince bought and paid their loyalty. So when these people try to like dust him up and say, you know what, he's good. Vince is. What's your opinion on Vince? And he's a great man and all this. And then yet you had these other people questioning what's the. These pregnant pauses. What's your opinion of Vince's legacy? They know. They just don't want to say it. And it's almost like when OJ, the OJ murder trial, NFL guys not wanting to comment on a fellow player, big star or whatever. Why not? Why not talk about it?
Yeah, I said that when they were running down the, the horrific acts that he's done through the years, especially, even we didn't touch upon it, but how he continued to show after one of their performers fell from the sky and died.
Yes.
And they asked whether or not he would continue to show if Shane was the one that it happened to. You hear all these stories, but then you also hear the good side of Vince, who paid for individuals to go into rehab for their drug addictions or their alcoholism. Right. The Wellness Act. To make sure that individuals weren't on using steroids or keeping clean and such. Being able to pay for Ric Flair's bankruptcy and divorces and such like that. But like you mentioned, it's all transactional.
Transactional, yeah.
They also, you have to say that maybe I'm a little bit guilty of those things.
Well, the other thing is, they don't mention that these people had to pay him back. Like they had to pay, like Cornette mentioned Vince gave him a loan, like 25 grand or something to get a house or get an apartment. I can't remember which it was, but he said, and he garnished it from my wages. There was no interest, but he wasn't so altruistic. Cornette had a value to Vince. So that's something that was an investment really for Vince, nothing else. Like that's one thing Howard would never do, is help out his employees financially, even if it was a loan or something. And so, and Flair, he was on the network, Patrick Bet David. He talked about, I had to pay him back whatever $800,000, which I'm sure Flair drank most of his fortune away as well. But the divorce, the idea that he goes, I paid him back, whatever, and so he was always like, oh, thank God Vince did this. But again, you have to temper. Like if you're that person and you're the receiving end of that transactional relationship, don't mistake this as some kindness from Vince. It is, right, and it isn't.
Yeah, even with there was talk with Vicky Guerrero when Eddie passed.
Yes,
they paid for the services. He paid out the rest of the contract and stuff. But people didn't know that she had to work for that. That they made her an on-air personality. She never wanted to be in the business. But to finish off, I guess whatever he paid
to work it off, basically.
He worked it off, and for her, she became one of the hottest heels in wrestling during that era. So she made the best of it. But still, it wasn't like he gave it to her and it was like, hey, for contributions Eddie's made to the business. No, she had to work it off.
Yeah, and that's the level of scumbaggery. That's like a Mel Karmazin type scumbag. Where he at some point he had money to burn. There's no question. I mean, he bragged about being a billionaire. I don't know that. I mean, that was true at some point, I'm certain. But in the end, it's so sordid and so disgusting that the smartest thing they could do is they've distanced themselves from it. The only other thing I would have done in this documentary, for example, is use more archival footage of interviews, shoot interviews if they've been able to get permission, of getting people talking about the real deal, especially guys like Animal, Laurinaitis, his brother. What's Animal's name? God, his first name. It escapes me now. I don't even know why I'm forgetting this. Anyway, he Joe Laurinaitis.
Right.
And his stories about the business, he's so well spoken, he's so really good, and he's great with the fans and stuff, and you're true, like, rest in peace. They would have been done better to get rid of the Hogan interviews because he's such a bullshitter.
Yeah, and then even with that, how the people in the doc talked about how Vince loved to use real life issues and put them on TV. For instance, with Hawk's, alcoholism and his drugs, they exploited that, and that's the big one too, the exploitation of it. The real life romantic drama between Edge and Matt Hardy actually played out in front of us on TV during that era.
Yeah.
It was looked at as a stroke of genius, but once again, it was also Vince humiliating his stars.
Yeah, and again, is it control? Is it narcissistic supply? Is it just sadism? Is it something that he enjoys? I think it's just him playing with his toy soldiers and loving knocking them down so he could set them back up for something. And it's something, again, they say, even though the documentary, a lot of people have criticized it for not really unraveling enough layers, I think they unraveled enough to make everybody see fully illustrated that this guy was a major league dirtbag on so many levels.
Yeah, I didn't think of it much as a smear campaign or smear job.
No way.
Vince. I think it was already known by most of wrestling fans and such. Did it do him any favors? No. But what I really think who it did a favor for was WWE. I think this was a big campaign for the Raw brand going to Netflix to draw more eyes to WWE, because now it's saying, hey, this is what it used to be. this is how it is now. We're not doing that Vince thing anymore. We're not having those kinds of storylines and personas being televised on this show. This is going to be totally different. And I want you guys to have a look here for us.
Well, the other thing is, and I almost forgot to mention this, it was reported that Vince attempted to buy the series from Netflix and obviously do a catch and kill. So he clearly wouldn't have done this until the stuff came out at the end in the last episode, which was, again, it could have gone another fucking half hour or an hour just talking about the depravity of it, because there's people that they get away scot-free. Like you said, John Laurinaitis, he was involved in this. We don't get the corroborative testimony, but we don't get more details into that. And if you want to do it, to me, it's not a hatchet job. A hatchet job implies you're manipulating the facts to make this person look bad when there's no manipulation needed, is the point.
Yeah, I think what they did more was try to polish the turd and make it gold and make it look like gold. And and nobody's discrediting what he did for wrestlers, wrestling and how he elevated it to a worldwide commodity for everyone involved who could come in and invest and get money from it, in and out, be a part of it. But at the same time, the shadiness, the underlining sexuality that he would do, sexual trysts that he will have backstage and then bring it out to the forefront.
Yes.
It even to this day, when I'm looking at the whole Trish Stratus thing, I felt bad for her when she talked about it, because she said, that it was just part of the job. It was a business, but you could also feel that there was uncomfortable tension there. And see that with a lot of the on-screen talent. It was sad to hear about the whole Ashley Massaro thing with the whole the allegations with the military stuff, and that was brushed under away. There was a lot of deviant stuff that was going on that people may not have been aware of, but at the same time, it wasn't much of a smear campaign for me, but it was just more of a promotion for WWE coming.
And keep in mind, guys, we're not absolving, let's say, the wrestlers for the way they acted on the road with road rats and stuff like that, which are the term for groupies in that business. But the difference is those guys aren't running the corporation. They're guys going with willing participants in debauchery, threesomes, drugs, drinking, whatever the hell, bar brawls and stuff. That you first of all, you expect. Second of all, you have to realize that some of those things get glossed over and paid for by Vince to make sure that they go away. The Ken Patera situation, whatever, that was just the way they explained it. No one has ever wanted McDonald's bad enough to throw a boulder through the window. And if you guys want to know the story, it's out there. Basically, they closed up and they wouldn't serve the burgers. He was really hungry. He was Mr. Saito, and they were, I can't remember, it was Colorado or somewhere, and then they wouldn't sell them. And he goes, "We don't have it. We can't sell anything." He goes, "What are you talking about? You got a bunch of burgers right there, like the leftover burgers that they didn't sell that day." And they're like, "No, we can't do it." And Patera was such a hothead. He didn't
commercial at that time. I think it was because they're gonna film a commercial that day or that night.
That's right.
Give it to him.
Right. And the other thing, so who knows what was in those burgers? It could have been like styrofoam. Anyway, he said someone else threw the rock, which is, if it was a boulder, who the hell else is in that parking lot? It's going to be throwing the boulder, like some random schmuck? No way. So if he was less of a hothead and less of an alcoholic, he would have just paid the guy some money and said, "Look, just honestly, just slip us a few. No one will know." Right. And this is pre-CCTV days, guys, at least for McDonald's. Anyway, it's the funniest story ever. And I'm thinking to myself, a Big Mac nails you 2 years in prison. But you don't even enjoy the Big Mac. You didn't even get the burger.
Yeah. This is more of a story, like you mentioned. It has nothing to do with like what wrestlers do on their off time, getting from event to event. It's more about a story of power, narcissism, ego, disconnecting from family members, connecting with other people that aren't his family and having more of a relationship with them. being able to undercut corporations and companies and such, so that they don't progress. There was so many other stories that they could have talked about with Vince, where he undercutted wrestling promotions not being able to be televised because that was his territory and such. Making sure that no other company ran at Madison Square Garden because that's his building, he claims. There's a lot more stories that they could have touched up on. But I think with this was basically a insight. And there's possible talks of doing another one. There's I guess like in baseball, they have an extra innings of Vince. They'll have something that's coming on.
It wouldn't surprise me, and it wouldn't go amiss. The other thing is, and they pointed this out on Cornette's podcast, that what he was pissed off with later with WCW, them poaching stars, which was, he said he did the same thing to AWA, NWA. He did the exact same thing, so he didn't like it. And again, that's a stern parallel. If I can look for, I can do this, but don't you dare try it, and so the exploitation of the workers, the exploitation, like sexual exploitation of underlings, let's say, employees, cover-ups. I mean, Stossel didn't go about it the right way back in the day, obviously for lovers of kayfabe, but he wasn't wrong. Like all these guys going after the underbelly, there was more of that than ever as it was going into Vince's era. And it was, I think once he decided he could get away with more, he would. And that's why the deviant sex and all that stuff, he just decided it's not doing it for me anymore. I need something even more. I need to be able to, so you guys, if you see the documentary part 6 and you see the text message, which I'm not going to recite, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about in the reports. So
yeah, I was kind of actually shocked they actually showed it as well. But
me too. Fucking hell,
Yeah. But all in all, your thoughts on how we talked about how it was compiled. Now talking about it now, what's your thoughts about how everything played out and how it looks for Vince himself from here on out?
He's done. I don't think, because he's soiled goods essentially. It's no different than Weinstein. Weinstein's not getting in with I don't know what's Universal. He's not going to be working at Disney. Although he does look like a Disney character if you animated him, a big tub of shit. But the thing is, so if those of you guys listening to this, like who is this documentary for? Really, it's a good primer, not perfect, because again, the history of the WWE gets glossed over in the first episode, and they really could have shown you some more of the historical aspects of you. And we have a native guy. We've got like 2 native guys. We've got the Samoans. We've got this, something for every demographic. They had Greek wrestlers, but they never actually came out as being Greek, Gorgeous George, Bobo Brazil, that kind of thing. Haystacks Calhoun. The history of it was actually quite amusing. And then, so for those of you who want a cross section and something very, mostly encompassing, it's not a bad documentary as these go. For someone who knows the history of wrestling and who's very well versed, it's probably going to be a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I feel the same way as well, especially with me wishing that I could not be so in tuned and jaded, especially with how wrestling is, and especially with WWE and such. I wish that I could look at wrestling in this docuseries with
fresh eyes
and rose-colored glasses, But for me, it was knowing stuff already, and I really would have liked for them to dig a little bit more deeper with him, but he wasn't going to do it. He was not, and he let it know. He let it know at episode 1. He wasn't going to give you much, and for others, this is like I said, a good launching pad for you to, if you want, get back into wrestling or get an idea of what is done to put the machine together. This is actually a good idea to get a good look at it first glance. And I thought Netflix did a splendid job with that.
Yeah, definitely worth definitely entertaining enough to keep you enthralled throughout the most of the thing. But again, it's not perfect, but few things are in this life, and certainly with documentaries, either you're saying they went too far or they just didn't go far enough. It's very rare that they get the full story and it's complete and a perfect package. And so definitely worth watching. I'd say that.
All right. Thanks again, my brother, for your time.
Thank you, sir. This is the cross promotion. This is the AWA NWA like world champ Rick Martel versus Harley Race going at it in what do you interfederation matches. So we hope those of you at QF who've listened to this, we wholeheartedly, of course, recommend you check out Turnbuckle Tabloid if you haven't already. And I know that your episodes tend to be a bit shorter than ours from generally, but very digestible, and the editing is excellent.
Thank you. And also make sure you check us out on New York Wrestle Media, in which this episode will be on Under the Ring Apron. It's a more interview, behind the scenes look at wrestling and such, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this for the new network that we have going on here. Thank you, my brother, for your time.
Cheers, brother. Take care.
Cheers as well. Thank you.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
Turnbuckle Tabloid.